I wanted to continue the conversation that I've been having openly here about Kayfabe, how it pertains to professional wrestling, but also just what it is and how we interact with narrative storytelling, especially as it blurs that line between reality and fiction. We tell our own story based on these important things that happen, transitioning from one stage of life to another, from childhood to adolescence to adulthood, things like graduations, marriages, promotions, having children. Those are the elements that we include in our story. We don't worry about every day to day unless something interesting happens. When we consume narratives of various forms, we are preparing ourselves, we're gaining wisdom, we're gaining experience at a rate that is faster than we could acquire it by our own experience alone, because we are taking our mundane moments of life and filling them with the salient information of somebody else's life. And I think that's a very good thing. I mean, I think that you could say that's why God presented the Bible in the way that he did. You read through the book of Genesis and Exodus and Samuel and the Gospels, and the narrative is the overarching framework, and those other bits are like the mundane bits. That's the time when you go to work and you really have to focus on work for 8 hours, and you can't really say anything about it except that you really concentrated hard, So the Bible reflects that aspect of how we live and how we perceive reality. And so I was thinking about this scale, so from reality on one side to something that's like pure escapist fiction on the other, Star Wars, or something that's just, silly cartoons of some sort. So that's like on the opposite, on one side, and reality's on the other. And wrestling, some of what makes it so compelling is that it's closer to the reality side of things than the purely narrative side. And in a sense, we're tricking ourselves, or by suspending our disbelief. We can pretend like this is real life, and the expected outcomes of a scripted narrative come to play. So I think that's kind of where wrestling lies, because a lot of people still have a hard time seeing the value in it. I'm trying to explain this to my wife, and so we've talked about this a little bit, but something that's adjacent to wrestling, a sort of a kayfabe narrative TV show that we watched, is Cobra Kai. And if anybody's seen it, it's just finished its final episodes. We watched those the other day, and it's been going on for quite a while. And it is basically this resurrected story based on the Karate Kid, taking some of these secondary aspects, and somebody's writing a new narrative of it. And there's sort of a whole interesting how it interplays with reality and other things about even the story of how it comes to be, because it comes along first as like a YouTube premium show, and it was very much wanting to be subversion, because whereas Karate Kid focused on Daniel LaRusso and Mr. Miyagi, and it's like squeaky clean and they're the good guys, this was focused on his sort of youthful nemesis, Johnny Lawrence from the movie, who is from the Cobra Kai dojo, the bad dojo. And in the recasting of it in this story, essentially, he's kind of the Miyagi character. He's stepping into this role of, he's not trying to teach anybody karate, but there's this kid who's getting beat up, and he's kind of showing him the ropes. And they did a lot of stuff to make it more gritty, and there's a lot of swearing and things like that, and it's whoa, the violence is not, they notched it up, and it was kind of you could tell it was almost just let's just take the script and we'll flip all the elements of the script, and that was the model that they were following. But as things progressed, they had to make some different choices. So it went off of YouTube Premium and got picked up by Netflix, and Netflix is more interested in fulfilling a real narrative story arc. And they're interested in making more money, so they want more seasons, so they're trying to flesh things out. And, they already had the original cast of characters get in there, but they basically start doing that more and more, and they're basically building a narrative that's taking place in the current day based on these characters, which are now 40 years old. So it's like a 40-year story in some sense, which is pretty remarkable. And even that they have, they have the footage from the movies, the old movies, and they're using those as flashbacks and stuff. Like, that's presenting you with like this really incredible scale, because part of what they're doing is they're making sure like we're getting all the same actors, and most of these actors are not big stars, so they are available and very happy to have their career resurrected, whereas they've been just doing little bit parts between now and then. But this presents you with like a challenge of like, well, okay, well, how do you make a story like this extend for 6 seasons? And they kind of have to keep expanding it into more and more crazy territory as far as like what's happening in the story. And but at the core, it's centered around karate, like, and just suburban kids doing karate and the life of teenagers, and it's so ultimately it's very low stakes, but they're ratcheting it up, the drama, and they're having some kind of crazy stuff that happens, and occasionally they will sort of break the fourth wall in a self-referential way, especially like Daniel's wife is like, this is karate, why is all these crazy things happening? Because there's like fights breaking out in the school, kids are getting their bones broken and getting paralyzed and stuff, and occasionally somebody dies, and so they're really trying to like find this balance between just crazy storytelling and the believability factor, and they're being somewhat playful about it. And of course, there is this element of the real reality where they're resurrecting these characters by using the same actors and writing stories about like what's happened in this 40-year span. And so, it's very interesting because when the last episode happened and like the climactic moment that you're more or less expecting, you very easily could have probably expected how it was going to play out. And my wife was like, yeah, like she was very pumped about the ending. And it was, which was just kind of funny, which is, showing you like, this is a ridiculous thing. Like, why are you so happy about the outcome of a fictional karate tournament? Like, what is going on here? And I think that is kind of the kayfabe power that's going on. Now, the other interesting thing that comes into play is, just like with wrestling, with the whole Cody Rhodes story that happened, there was this phenomenon where the will of the people, eventually swayed the outcome of events, or the writing was on the wall. The people were expressing what they wanted, and eventually the company knew they would have to give people what they wanted. And a really similar thing, I think, happened with this show, because they had a little round table, after last episode, and the writers are talking about like, how are we going to end this show? And they were saying, they could have gone different ways with how it ended. Or they could have had an ambiguous ending. They could have had a dark ending. They could have gone postmodern or whatever. And I think that essentially, as this series progressed and the fan base that develops around it, I don't remember if there was a real hiatus or just switched from YouTube to Netflix. But, there is kind of a little bit of this phenomenon that's happened since the internet age, where shows have been resurrected, canceled shows have been brought back because of demand from the people. And so there is a sort of element of that, or there was a real element where it's like, we're writing this story, we're the creatives, we're in charge, but we want to please our audience. And so what they ended up relying on is a lot of, I would say, classic story type, narrative arcs, redemptive moments, all these things. Now, there's sort of an interesting element to it in that, because it started off as like the subverted, it's the bad guys and not the good guys, they didn't go like all the way. They didn't turn Johnny Lawrence into some kind of a Mary Sue. It was really interesting in a way that it shows like, okay, well, there's a more circuitous path for these kind of gray characters, a little bit of, or a guy with some rough edges, but he gets there in the long run. And he gets there not in the classic hero's journey, but in a more circuitous hero's journey that's more appropriate, because it was about his development. And, you know, essentially Daniel LaRusso had this great advantage in life because he got a great mentor who helped him in his hero's journey. Whereas Johnny, his counterpart, had a really bad mentor, and that really stunted him. They're both trying to now take on the role of being the mentor, and they're finding different difficulties. For Daniel, perhaps because he wasn't sufficiently tested in all the ways that someone needs to be tested to become a good mentor. And Johnny, you know, has to essentially do his growing up to become the mentor. He understands the hard part. He doesn't understand the earlier parts of that, you know, journey of masculinity. It's interesting. It goes on a creative, entertaining path that plays with some of those sort of like, you know, it doesn't give you the pure archetypal thing. It gives you some of this ambiguity, some of this inversion, but I feel like it's an appropriate amount. It's an amount that reflects some of the reality of life. And even with some of like the female characters, you know, it's like, well, the female characters are also fighting and doing karate, but you know, they have to approach it in a different way, and their motivation has to be different. So anyway, so it kind of worked out. It's a good show, I think, overall, but it's just interesting to see how, in some sense, there was an element of unpredictability to it, but there was also an expectation that we as fans were going to get what we wanted. And that was sort of a comforting thing about it. And, you know, there's a limit to like how much craziness can happen in a show about karate, teenagers fighting karate, that sets a boundary. You know, like there wasn't going to be some, you know, truly horrendous thing. The satisfaction of seeing problems being solved and people going through suffering and affliction at a scale that's more easy for us to digest. And it's just interesting how it fit in sort of this medium space between the pure drama of a, you know, just somebody trying to make a good fictional TV show and kind of this WWE wrestling world of kayfabe. It takes an interesting space in between. So my suggestion would be, if someone is like, I don't really understand why you like wrestling, I would say maybe try giving that show a try, you know, give it a chance and see if you like it, and see if you can kind of tease out those same elements that are present in the wrestling world. And maybe just even to think about, like, why do we like something that we know is a little bit more scripted and scripted in a little bit more of a cheesy way than something, you know, that's more complex. Like there was definitely a period of time where anything that was grim and dark and complex was just like received the accolades as like, oh, this is sophisticated, this is what a mature viewer wants to see. And too much of that just makes you sick and grumpy and not have fun. And so this is a good alternative to that. So those are my thoughts on Cobra Kai, the training wheels for kayfabe. Thank you.